Hello and welcome back to our latest We Are Sunderland briefing with myself, Dom Shaw and Scott Wilson. Just a thanks to start for those who joined in with our live video first thing on Monday morning. That did pretty well for us, good interaction, and we enjoyed it. So we'll do a few more of those in the weeks ahead where we won't be discussing transfers obviously now, but hopefully we will be discussing Sunderland rolling on in the Championship promotion race. Scott, I've banged the drum on several occasions this season for the Luton away win being the best win of the season so far for a number of reasons, really. I think it's got to have been overtaken now, hasn't it? That win on Monday night is surely Sunderland's best result of the season so far.
It was a good game, wasn't it? I mean, that's the first thing. It was a belter of a game. Yeah, I think it probably is the biggest win of the season so far, like you say, for lots of different reasons. I mean, obviously, you've got the regional angle to it. You've got the fact that Sunderland were beating a side who, don't look like they're going to be in the automatic promotion picture now, but you would imagine will be banging the race for the playoff places. Kept the pressure on the top two, who obviously just keep on winning. But I think also the fact, Sunderland had to show lots of different attributes to win that game. I mean, the first 20 minutes, they were up against it, weren't it? You know what I mean? That was, I'm not saying it was as uncomfortable as Sunderland have looked all season, but it was probably as uncomfortable as they've looked for a while. I thought Boro started strongly, obviously got the goal. Force has that big chance with a side foot shot that goes over. If that goes 2-0, then I think Sunderland are really up against it. As it was, fair play to Regis Lebris and his players. They dug in when they had to. They made sure they didn't go under. They then played their way back into the game. They then obviously go 2-1 up. Okay, front foot, everything's great. Play some brilliant football. I'm sure we'll get to Le Fee, we'll get to Isidor and all of that. But then Boro come back into it and equalise. So there's questions asked again of Sunderland. And I thought, yes, while there's an element of fortune to the winner, if there was going to be a winner in that last 10, 15 minutes, it was always going to be Sunderland. They were the team on the front foot. They were the ones asking the questions and pressing. And in the end, they get, a really, really good win. A massive kind of springboard now for the rest of the season. A big statement, I think, in terms of how Sunderland can cope with big games and difficult situations, and just a whole host of positives.
Fitting that even if the winning goal was fortunate, it came from Enzo Le Fee, who we'll get to. He was class again. We'll get to him. But the scenes at full time, the scenes from the players told you just how much it means. But Lebris's celebrations, I thought were pretty telling as well. I don't think we've seen that much, if at all, this season. The emotions kind of coming out as much as they did.
No, I mean, it was a big game, wasn't it? A sold-out Riverside, sold-out away end. For all the incessant talk, is it a derby, isn't it? It's definitely a game that's got a bit more on it. Obviously, like I say, the fact that it's up against a promotion rival, a team who, will be in and around it for the top six. But then all those things that I come back to, Sunderland had to show a lot of character to win that game. And I think the players knew at the final whistle that they'd come through a pretty stern examination, a game that had its ups and downs, but one that's left Sunderland in a great position because they found a way to get all 3 points in the end.
I'm just looking for it there. We spoke to Dan Neil afterwards, and Neil talked about what you're talking about there. He said, coming from behind, what you said about the 20 minutes, we came out with a fire show and flags today. It was absolutely bouncing in the stands. We said we had to get through the first 20 minutes. We didn't manage to do that. But like I said, the character of the squad is unquestioned now. We've done it so many times this year where we go behind and we bounce straight back. I thought it was a really good reaction by the lads. It shows the character and togetherness, and that away end at the end to get the win, to celebrate in front of them. That you can imagine the kind of feeling in the squad where not invincibility, but if they go 1-0 down in a game, then they're clearly so confident. There's so much belief there at the minute, but the resilience that I think they've built up over the course of the season, and that was the word Lebris used afterwards, wasn't it? Unprompted. Resilience was one of the first things he said when he came and sat down with us after the game in the press conference.
Yeah, and that's a question that's been asked of this team, isn't it? Largely because they're so young. Are they going to be resilient enough? Do they have the characters in there? Well, they do. I think we've seen enough of that. Listen, there's been a lot of talk about the number of late goals Sunderland have thrown away this season, and that has been an issue. But I don't think that's got anything to do with a lack of resilience or a lack of character. It's been switching off at various stages. There's been, and don't get me wrong, it's a habit they need to cut out. But I think one thing you definitely cannot say about this side is that it lacks character, or it lacks the ability to bounce back, or it lacks the ability to dig in when things are going against them. I think Sunderland have shown that on a number of times this season, that, all right, yeah, there might be a lot of young players in this team, but it's not a callow squad. There is real character and real strength and resilience in there. And they're going to need that between now and the end of the season because, obviously Burnley won again last night. The top three teams are not going to go away, and Sunderland are going to have to grind points out in games when they're not absolutely at their best if they're going to have any chance of overhauling two of them.
Before we talk individuals, you talked about it being a springboard. When you look at the fixtures running across the bottom there, that Leeds one's the obvious standout. Watford home, Luton home next. Just looking at the Championship away table this season, Watford 17th in the Championship away table. Have only won 3 of 15 games away from home. Have lost 9. Luton 23rd in the away table. Have only won 1 of 15. Have lost 12. Have only scored 12 goals away from home all season. There's no getting away from the fact this is a huge opportunity now for Sunderland to kick on, isn't it?
It is. It absolutely is. And coming off the back of the Plymouth game, I think it's an important game on Saturday as well, just to show that Sunderland still have the capability of beating teams that really they should be beating at the Stadium of Light without it necessarily having to get fraught and difficult. You know what I mean? Again, the late goal against Plymouth, yeah, but I think anyone who was at that game would accept that Sunderland were far from their best. I didn't deserve to win that game, in my opinion. Probably deserved something, didn't deserve to win it. Well, these next 2 games against Watford and Luton, what we really, really would like to see is just 2 routine, fairly dull, fairly run-of-the-mill home wins, and then we're off to Leeds, aren't we? But yeah, I think you're right. Ticked an awful lot of boxes this season, Sunderland. I think the one that just needs ticking again now is beating lesser sides at home, and it's a chance to do it this weekend.
Let's talk individuals then. Le Fee first. He can play a bit, can't
he? He's not bad, is he? Oh, hey. I mean, Middlesbrough, a right back, Tommy Smith, announced his retirement earlier today.
I know where this is going.
Yeah, well, when I saw Middlesbrough right back announce his retirement, you're thinking, okay. I mean, Luke Ayling, goodness me, he'll be seeing Enzo Le Fee and his nightmares for the rest of the blooming year, won't he? I mean, brilliant. Some of those highlight reels that have been flying around on social media, the flicks, the tricks, the little one where he puts it through his legs. But I mean, the touch for the goal is just extraordinary. And then to obviously drive down the flank and deliver the cross and everything. What a player. I mean, listen, it's only in one thing. I don't want to get too carried away, but he already looks like the best player in the Championship. And you're already...
And he's playing out of position.
He's not playing in his best position, yeah. You're increasingly wondering how on earth have Sunderland managed to get him. I mean, I know they've managed to get him largely because of Lebris and the relationship they've had and all of that. But, I mean, goodness me, what a good player. I mean, can you remember a kind of... I'm not saying a better player in the Championship because, there have been some, but certainly a player who's made a bigger and quicker impact in Championship football than he has.
It's funny, but you mentioned Middlesbrough there, and obviously on the back of the game, when Boro won promotion in 15-16, they signed Gaston Ramirez in January. Yeah. Now, Ramirez, probably not quite the pedigree of Le Fee, signed from Southampton, but he beat a national footballer. He was a real talent, and he ultimately won them promotion, didn't he, in the second half of the season? I think there's every chance we're looking back at the end of the season, talking about Le Fee and saying that. I mean,
Neves at Wolves is the one that keeps getting trotted out, isn't it? That just looked quite clearly out, a player who was in the wrong division. Well, Le Fee looks like a player who's in the wrong division. I don't think there's any doubt.
And Lebris said that afterwards, didn't he? I think it was you that said to him, "Can he get better?" And he said, "Well, Yeah, he's a Premier League player. But did he tell you at Derby he was 70%?
Derby said 70%, so I just kind of jokingly said, that's not him at 70%, is it? And he kind of had a little laugh at him, and he went, maybe 75. He knows he's got a player there that really he shouldn't have at this level. You know what I mean? He is way too good to be a championship player. And like you say, once Mundle and or Watson get back, I'm pretty certain that Le Fee moves inside. Now, what that means for the rest of the team, it'll be interesting to see. But Le Fee as a number 10, I think he could cause absolute havoc at this level as a number 10.
Watson, let's talk transfers then. But let's start with Jayden Danns, because he was the striker who came in on deadline day. The deal was done, but he's gone back to Liverpool for treatment on a back injury that was detected in the medical. Just talk us through the kind of timeline, really, and how that came about and how we got to where we're at now.
Yeah, so, well, I guess when we talk about the timeline, so, there's lots of elements in this. One of the things that I've seen some fans criticising Sunderland for is you've left yourself open to this by leaving it to the last minute. And I can kind of see that, don't get me wrong. If you're trying to sign a player on the afternoon of deadline day, then if something goes wrong, you're in trouble. And that's the position Sunderland have got themselves into. Why have they got themselves into that position? Well, it's twofold, really. One is because strikers they went for earlier in the window they couldn't get. We know, obviously, Brereton Diaz. We know Tom Cannon. We also, the understanding is that there was at least two others that they were reasonably well down the line for, didn't get for whatever reason. So then the decision is, okay, who we're going to go for in the last couple of days? Well, Jayden Danns. He'd always been on their list. The problem with Danns was that Liverpool were adamant that he was not going to go anywhere until right at the end of the window. And Liverpool's stance on that strengthened even more once they were guaranteed qualified for the Champions League knockout stages with one game left. Slot was adamant he was going to rest pretty much a full team. Danns was going to start that game against PSV Eindhoven. So he was not going anywhere until that game was out the way. So that then only left Sunderland with a couple of days to do this deal. They've won the battle to get him. Blackburn wanted him. Hull wanted him. I'm told there was at least another championship club that had a bid on the table. But Danns has chose Sunderland. Liverpool have chose Sunderland. It looks like everything's going to plan. He has a medical, which is routine procedure. Even if it's not a permanent deal for a loan signing, it's routine to do a medical. The medical shows up an issue with a back problem with Danns. Now, Sunderland obviously then are duty bound to report this to both the player and Liverpool. They've then got a decision to make. Do we pull the plug on this? In which case, okay, we pull the plug. We're not committed to anything then with Danns, but it's by now tea time on deadline day. We're not going to get another striker. It's as simple as that. We would have to go with what we've got to the end of the season. Or do we come to an agreement with Liverpool? Liverpool are now saying, well, look, we want to treat him. He's not going to you to be treated. He's our player. We think he's, a massive potential for the future. This has got to be right. We want to treat him. So then it's Sunderland. Well, okay, does he go back to Liverpool? And do we accept that he's not going to be available for a period? But hopefully we get him before the end of the season. Maybe, timescales are very vague at this stage. But maybe a month before, maybe 6 weeks before. Maybe have him if there is a playoff campaign. And if something at that stage has happened or is happening to Mayenda or Isidor, then Sunderland's calculation is, well, it's better to have Danns for some of the season than nothing at all. I think they're right to make that call. I think if the option is where you get no one or you get Danns, it's better to have the option of having him, even if he ends up playing hardly any football. Could they have handled the situation better in the window as a whole? Yes, probably. But we've talked on previous vids about why they were finding it hard to get a striker, because we saw on Monday night, Wilson Isidor is Sunderland's main striker. He's going to be their starting striker between now and the end of the season, provided he stays fit. So the type of striker you're then bringing in to deputise for him, it's difficult, isn't it? A top striker is not going to do it. Premier League clubs potentially going to be reluctant when they know you've got Isidor and Mayenda. Do you sign a a project striker whom you might be able to develop, well, that's fine. But then what happens if you get promoted? Are they going to be at the level you need? There's a lot of questions to be answered there. So I do have a bit of sympathy for Sunderland on this one, because I don't think anyone foresaw. Well, they didn't. Nobody foresaw. It's not like Danns had been injured for the last year, and you know, I mean, he played a Champions League game 4 days before he had this medical. So Liverpool knew nothing about it. Danns now, you know, I've seen subsequently, well, he has had previous back problems. Has he had growing pains? Should they have known? Well, yeah, okay, they might have known that there was the potential for an issue to be there. But that's why you have the medicals in the first place, isn't it? So you've got to go with what the medical's telling you. And like I said, the fact that he played in the Champions League last week, I just think they've been a bit unlucky, to be fair.
There's a few strands to it, isn't there? And that, first of all, the fact that he signed a new contract with Liverpool before the move was confirmed, and he played in the Champions League last week, show that someone have got a real talent there. How highly Liverpool value him. Yeah, I did some with the lads from Redmen TV yesterday, and they were asking about Danns, and they were asking how he fits in, and they were saying how versatile he is and how he plays across the forward line. And I wasn't really overly aware of that, if I'm honest, but you can see why. With that in mind, you can see why he's ticked the boxes for Sunderland, and then explain the background and obviously what Labrise has said in the past. But it's not beyond the realms of possibility that we get to the summer, and really, whether Sunderland have won promotion or not, how old's Danns? 19. He's not going to be playing regular first team football for Liverpool next season. Do you get him back in the summer? And even if he doesn't play an awful lot of football between now and the end of the season, you know, he's getting a feel for it. This might not happen. This is me just purely speculating. I haven't spoken to anyone about this, but you know, you could absolutely understand it, and you'd understand Liverpool's perspective in being keen for him to go out and play. Let's be honest, they're not going to be short up front, either with their attacking options. And the other thing I think is, when you go back to like the Joe Gellart signing a few years ago, which I thought, when Sunderland made that sign, I thought that was a really good signing at the time. Well, he ended up playing out of position and as the main man. Touch wood, providing there's no injuries or setbacks. When Danns does get ready, the kind of pressure isn't really going to be there, is it? It's going to be an added bonus, providing Isidor stays fit.
As long as Isidor stays fit, yeah.
Yeah, no, it's going to be an added bonus. That is clearly the risk. That is clearly the risk. If Isidor gets injured on Saturday, then you're suddenly left with Elijah Mayenda, who I think has been really good this season, but you're left with him as your only fit striker. That is clearly the balance and the risk that Sunderland had to weigh up in those final hours of the window.
And Sunderland are going to be a hostage to fortune there, and that's where, you know, while I do have sympathy for them, and I don't think there's an awful lot they could. Well, there isn't anything else they could have done once Danns became the only show in town. You know, you can question the fact that they haven't been able to get anyone else before midday on deadline day, knowing that the striker was the priority. And for all that, I fully accept it's been difficult and there's been reasons for that. You know, you're absolutely right. They need Wilson Isidor to stay fit now between the end of the season, because while Mayenda can play there, all the evidence so far suggests that Mayenda as a lone striker is not the same as Mayenda playing as part of a two. You know, when he's played as a lone striker, he hasn't looked anywhere near as effective. Now, you know, maybe with a bit more confidence behind him, that'll be a little bit different. But yeah, Sunderland now desperately need Isidor to stay fit. It's a good point you make on Danns and maybe the future, though, because what I do think is certainly everything that I hear is Liverpool have been pretty impressed by the way Sunderland have handled this and handled Danns on what was a difficult day for him, clearly. And yeah, that might well stand them in good stead if they do decide, well, that's a route we want to go down in the summer.
Just one quick one on Isidor before we talk about Watson. Getting that permanent deal was important, wasn't it? Because had that not happened, roll forward 2 months, we'd have been going to the academy every week, and most weeks there'd have been the sideshow of, what does the future hold for Wilson Isidor? Are you going to make it permanent in the summer? You know, it's good, sensible, shrewd business to just do that, get that done. He loves it here. He's happy. He's the main man. He's been a revelation. It probably, like, not understated business, because clearly it was it was a major deal. But the fact it came 2 days before deadline day, when someone were looking to sign another striker, when there was the Watson uncertainty in the background, maybe means it went slightly under the radar compared to what it would in any other normal day.
Yeah, it never feels the same when you sign a player who's already there, does it? Because in some ways you're not adding to the squad. But like you said, to be fair to Sunderland, if we rewind back to the summer when we were saying Sunderland need a striker, why can't they sign a striker? When was the last time they signed a proper striker? Well, they actually have, haven't they? It's kind of, like you say, it's crept up on us a little bit because he started playing out wide. We were told when he came in out wide.
He was at his best as a left,
yeah, rather than through the middle. He's eventually been moved through the middle.
Do you think? Sorry to put in. Do you think he surprised Sunderland for just how good he's been through the middle as the
as a number 9? Yeah, I think he has. Yeah, I think there was always confidence in him as a player, and he did come with a certain degree of pedigree. But yeah, I mean, I remember, sitting down with Christian Speakman not long after he arrived, and in the same week sitting down with Labris, and both of them were singing from the same hymn sheet, saying, we like him, he's versatile, he can play anywhere across the forward line. We see him really playing off the left. I mean, at the time, it was kind of not a Jack Clarke replacement, but he was filling the gap that Jack Clarke left. Now, obviously, he's now Sunderland's, number 9 and looks absolutely the part. And from a position where you were saying, well, Sunderland desperately need a proven championship striker. Well, they've got a striker now who's got 10 championship goals, has every chance of finishing the season somewhere between 15 and 20. And I mean, what would Wilson Isidor be worth in the open market now? 15 million?
I was going to say easily north of 10 million. And
so again, I think, you've got to give Sunderland a bit of credit for that, because it didn't look like they had that type of player on their books when the window closed in August, but actually they did.
Yeah, because I remember that conversation with Christian Speakman. Jack Clarke had either just gone or was in the process of going, and we were asking the question, well, how are you going to replace him? And he kind of said, well, we've got Romain Mundle and Wilson Isidor can play on the left. And it was more a case of, well, if Isidor plays there, we'll bring in another centre forward. Well,
yeah,
like I say, he's been a revelation. On the subject of left wingers, though, Tommy Watson,
yes,
obviously the kind of isn't he throughout deadline day, really. He didn't. He's still at Sunderland, which is clearly, great news for Sunderland. He's a match winner, isn't he? He's a real talent. But what did you make of the final hours, and what does it mean for the future with Watson? Is this just delaying the inevitable until the summer?
Potentially feels like it, doesn't it? I mean, I could see why Sunderland were considering, at the very least, potentially willing to sell Watson if the price had been right. I mean, he's massively exciting. He's got massive potential. Don't get me wrong. But the reality is he's played 6 championship games this season, hasn't he? I think started 6. He's very raw. He's very unproven. And losing Watson from the squad last month would have been nowhere near as damaging as losing a Job or a Rigg or a Neil or a Patterson or a Hume, because he hasn't played that much this season. Now, that said, clearly, if you're wanting to build a club, you want to build it around the likes of Tommy Watson. I completely get that. But the reality is, if you're a championship club, you're going to have to sell players along the way. Now, if someone get promoted in the summer, that's a different argument. Then you can, the need to trade players and keep bringing a little bit in is nowhere near as pressing. I guess what you'd say is Labris was very strong last week. If Tommy Watson goes, he has to be replaced. Well, Sunderland found themselves in a position where they couldn't replace him. And again, fair play, they stood firm and they didn't sell. So I think that says quite a lot for the extent to which Speakman and Louis Dreyfus are wanting to back Labris. Do I think he'll go in the summer? I think there's probably every chance. There's been an awful lot of noise now for 2 windows in a row around Tommy Watson, hasn't there? Brighton clearly want him. There were suggestions of Villa. There were suggestions of Palace. I mean, a lot, like I say, will depend on what league Sunderland are in and what their finances are looking at and what they're planning for next season. But there's clearly a lot of outside interest in Tommy Watson, isn't there? It'd be interesting to see once he's fit how much football he actually plays now between now and the end of the season. Because I think if him and Mundle are both fit, I think initially Mundle probably gets the nod. Do you?
Yeah, I think so. Like we were saying last week, the whole Watson thing, really, it's all on potential, isn't it? That's why it made it so hard to value him, and that when we were talking about how much he's worth last week, it's what clearly he's a huge talent now, but it's what he's going to become, isn't it? Sunderland want to keep him because of what he's going to become. Brighton want him because of what he's going to become. Brighton want to sign him now because of how much he's going to be worth 18, 24 months down the line. Sunderland are valuing him more than what Brighton would have probably initially deemed because they know what he's going to become. So but I agree. I think we've said this a few times, haven't we? There's a playoff final. Everyone's fit. I think. Well, does Le Fee start on the left now over than them both to get Rig, Bellingham, and Neil in? That's a conversation for another day. But I think if he was going over Mundle and Watson, as things stand now, I think it'd probably be Mundle in the team.
Yeah.
Just to wrap up, how would you grade Sunderland's January transfer window?
B, probably. They kept their key men. That was the first thing. What you didn't want was a gun to the head sale of Job or Neil or Rig, or that would have been the worst case scenario. Clearly, the best case scenario was you bring in a striker who's ready to go and you've got no issues. And if Isidor gets injured, it's not a problem because the cover's there. Well, they haven't achieved that. But they have brought in a player who looks already one of the best players in the Championship and has the potential between now and the end of the season to become an all-time Sunderland legend within the space of 3 months. So I think all of that in the round, probably a B. You?
Yeah. It's a fit striker away from being an A, isn't it? If you get a fit striker in, then you've kept your best players. You've signed one of, if not the best player in the Championship, and you've signed a striker to rival Isidor. They were never going to sign a striker who was going to come in and immediately be the main. They were never going to sign an Enzo Le Fee, but a centre forward, were they? No. It was never going to be that sort. The Danns injury, the unfortunate Danns injury situation probably rolls it down to a B. Let us know, get in the comments and let us know how you grade Sunderland's January transfer business, and do subscribe while you're at it if you haven't already. Leave a comment with anything else you want us to discuss in future vids, pods, and as we said at the start, we'll do a couple of live videos moving forward. If you're listening on your podcast platform, then do us a favour, rate and review as well there, because that's beneficial. Enjoy the game this weekend if you're there. I'm there on Saturday, so hopefully
it's Saturday lunchtime, isn't it?
Yeah. Hopefully 3 more points for Sunderland to keep rolling on, and then we'll be back next week to look back on that game and to discuss the Luton game as well. Take care. Enjoy the rest of your week.